I'm in your arms and you're kissing me, but there seems to be something missing. So sings the jazz singer in the lounge of the Park Hyatt Hotel in Tokyo during the opening minutes of Lost in Translation. These lyrics really sum up the situation of Bob Harris and Charlotte, the two main characters of the film. Both are locked in unsatisfactory marriages, Charlotte's being just 2 years old, whilst Bob is 25 long ones into his. They find themselves washed up in Japan's capital and in one of its most expensive hotels. Bob is there to promote Suntory whiskey, something I feel must try on Burns Night next year. Meanwhile, Charlotte is there with her photographer husband, who is absent from the film after the 40-minute mark. The film, directed by Sofia Coppola, is something of a slow burn. It takes about half an hour for the characters to even share their first words with one another. I can see how, on a repeat viewing, this could become tiresome, as the best parts of the film are definitely those when the two leads are together. They both seek an escape, so it's essential to see what they need to escape from, but it also feels more stifling in the beginning as compared to when they eventually meet. Despite being a slow burn, the film is extremely economical in its storytelling. By use of the mantra show don't tell, the film manages to convey the state of Bob's unhappy marriage, amazingly, through a fax machine. At night, Bob can't seem to sleep, and a fax comes to his machine from his wife, asking what type of shelf he wants in his study. After this, 3D impressions of shelves begin to print from the machine. The mundanity of this tells us all we need to know about his marriage. It's dull, and it's literally keeping him up at night. Similarly, with Johansson's character, a single phone call to her friend Lauren is enough for us to know that she's unhappy in her marriage. Interestingly, this phone call is largely ignored by her friend, and Charlotte hangs up. I think that this cry into the void is so powerful because it conveys how much Charlotte needs somebody to understand. Her tears in this scene contrast with the laughter she will later share with Bob. Another point of contrast is the cool girl who enters Bob's room near the start of the film. "I want you to rip my stockings," she says, and then when Bob almost does so, she screams, "Let me go, Mr. Harris." This bizarre and uncomfortable scene provides a sort of parody of what will become Bob and Charlotte's relationship later in the film. Bob's relationship with the cool girl is built on a lack of trust and empathy, just the opposite of what Bob and Charlotte will experience. Bob is, for the most part, perfectly innocent with both women, treating them with respect and dignity, yet for one, this treatment is a blessing, and for the other, it is equivalent to assault. The performances in this film are fantastic. Over just a 27-day shoot, Coppola managed to get the very best out of these actors. It is amazing to think that Johansson was just 17 at the time of shooting. She gets away with playing an older character, presumably in her 20s, very well. I was a little surprised to learn that she was awarded a BAFTA for her performance, not to take anything away from it, but I did feel she was playing second fiddle to Murray's lead. Murray manages to convey the exasperated, worn out and depressed very well. He had good training in Groundhog Day. He has the more expressive face of the two leads, and uses it to great effect to convey these negative emotions. This means that when it comes time for him to be excitable, romantic and funny, i.e. when he's with Johansson's character, the transformation is felt ever more strongly. In an interview conducted recently, Scarlett Johansson said that she found it difficult to relate to Bill Murray during the shooting of Lost in Translation. This seems to be due in part to the age difference and in part to their personalities clashing. Though this doesn't register at all on film, it is interesting to think about having to make a film in such circumstances. Considering the title of the film, it seems only fitting that cultural and age differences should come between the actors portraying the main characters. Murray apparently had highs and lows on set, something which seems believable when watching the film. Even if his emotions in real life don't match up scene for scene, there is certainly light and dark within his character. I had initially thought that this film had a problem with its male gaze. This was initially flagged up because Johansson's character spends a rather large part of the film in her underwear. Indeed, the first shot of the film is a voyeuristic view from behind of Charlotte wearing said underwear. However, not only was this film directed by a woman, thus making the idea of a directorial male gaze meaningless, the first shot lingers for so long that it becomes awkward rather than erotic. So, if the director is not gazing here, then presumably it is John, Charlotte's husband, who is. Perhaps not literally in this moment is he gazing, but more generally he is always objectifying her. This could be explained by the fact that his job as a photographer causes him to objectify, that is, turn into objects, all kinds of things. The shot fades out when the title card appears, meaning that it has no narrative relation to the rest of the film whatsoever. Thus, with the lack of any context, we realise that we have been part of this objectifying process, waiting for something to happen before being faded out to black. Even later in the film, When we're looking at Scarlett Johansson in these same pink underwear, we're also seeing Tokyo through her hotel room, or we're learning about her character as she listens to A Soul Search. There's never exactly a point to this state of undress, but at least it doesn't come at a cost of character development. Another reason why the male gaze isn't as prevalent in this film as it may appear on the surface is a lack of intimacy between the two main characters. Certainly a consummated affair with a younger woman would tend to fulfill certain male fantasies, but this is not what the film contains. The innocence in Bob and Charlotte's relationship is part of what makes this film so refreshing. There's even a scene where Bob carries Charlotte up to bed, tucks her in, and then leaves her. When they do finally sleep in the same bed, the innocent touch of a foot feels as intimate as an embrace. I think it's interesting that, with the presence of insomnia in the film, neither character seems to be able to sleep for several nights. The pair can finally sleep happily when with one another. This suggests some sort of codependency and even soulmate-like quality to their relationship, though of course neither will truly act on this fact. The fact that they are fish out of water, aliens on a foreign shore, only lends to this atmosphere of destiny which pervades the film. I do worry about the treatment of insomnia in this film, however. As somebody who once genuinely didn't sleep for 3 nights straight, I have to say that the characters bear it remarkably well. Things start to change after a couple of days without sleep. Time starts to feel oddly illusory, and a whole host of physical changes take place. I'm not saying that I wish the film had delved into the gritty reality of insomnia, but I do think it's unlikely that such a sleep-starved man would be able to make fully formed jokes to a stranger he'd recently met. I would say that this film doesn't tackle insomnia as a subject, but merely dips its toe into the waters. The formerly mentioned jokes show that this film is, in fact, quite funny. Several of the best lines were apparently improvised by Murray, but not in that showboating sort of way that some comedians have. Rather, they are subtle, cerebral jokes, which don't so much make you laugh as much as you appreciate them. In fact, the only time I laughed during the film was during a great bit of physical comedy involving Murray and an elliptical in the Park Hyatt's gymnasium. Unfortunately, some of the jokes in the film were at the expense of the Japanese people, and whilst I didn't find these particularly funny or necessary, I can forgive the film, as it was probably trying to portray Bob Harris, dried-up international superstar, as something of a casual xenophobe. In fact, the film as a whole has been criticised for its depiction of the Japanese people. As someone with an interest in Japanese culture and language, I found that this film did fall short in its depiction of the culture in a few ways. The Japanese people in the film are largely caricatured, from the overly passionate whiskey advert director, the overly hospitable hotel greeters, to the arcade machine bashing teens, and even to the drunk karaoke singers. The film never truly utilises what makes the culture unique and engaging to its advantage. Perhaps this is because the film is first and foremost a romance, or, as Marco Abel, Professor of English Studies and Film at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln puts it, a post-romance. And so in this way, the setting is largely aesthetic, not narrative-driven. It is absolutely the views of outsiders looking in, and, though based on experiences Coppola had in Tokyo in her 20s, the story does not functionally need to take place there. For anyone looking to delve a little deeper into Japan's culture, I can highly recommend James May's 6-part Amazon Prime series entitled James May, Our Man in Japan. With all that said about Tokyo not playing an essential role, the city does add a lot of charm to the film. The blinking red lights on top of skyscrapers blurred out into soft balls of bokeh, the bustle of various pedestrian crossings, the windows onto hazy blue buildings, all of these provide an aesthetic which greatly enhances the film visually. In fact, I hadn't expected the cinematography to be as sublime as it was. The lighting in the interior scenes was fantastic, and the outdoor scenes were shot, according to cinematographer Lance Accord, mostly naturally. The film had a sort of washed-out, dreamlike quality to it, which I ascribe to muted colours and frequent low-aperture settings giving blurred backgrounds. In places, the film even had an air of sci-fi in the way that only Tokyo can produce. Parts seemed to me reminiscent of Ghost in the Shell, the original of course, not the Johansson remake, and something of what Coppola calls the loneliness and isolation of the city comes across in several of these moments. This is also true of the soundtrack, which meshes extremely well with the visuals of the film. Featuring 5 original tracks from My Bloody Valentine frontman Kevin Shields, the backdrop of Tokyo provides a sort of mood board which the soundscape sits on top of. When I think of the film, I immediately think of MBV's song Sometimes and the shots of the city which accompany it. Some of the tracks for the film, however, are wordless and slot neatly into the non-diegetic moments. As with Marriage Story, which came out 16 years later, there is also some Scarlett Johansson singing in this picture, along with some much-needed Bill Murray karaoke. As with that film, here the songs further the story, as well as being entertaining to watch in and of themselves. Murray sings More Than This by Roxy Music, whilst Johansson sings Brass in Pocket by The Pretenders. Bob's song is appropriately romantic, soulful and slow, with the refrain, There is nothing more than this, coming up time after time. Meanwhile, Charlotte's song is flirtatious and energetic. This is appropriate, as throughout the film it is she who initiates the forays into the bustle of the city, whilst Bob prefers to be left alone in the lounge to enjoy his whiskey. Earlier in this review, I called this film a romance, but it really defies the confines of genre. It has some elements of a rom-com, but these are all twisted. The meet-cute becomes merely a smile across a lift, an event which Charlotte doesn't even remember. Neither character has an inconvenient ex, but a spouse, further defying the genre. There are also elements of comedy, but very few actual laughs. The ending is a mixture of happy and sad, so you could say it's more of a drama than a comedy. Overall, I think the term post-romance does a lot to convey the tone and beats of the film. The word has a sort of melancholy sound. It is as if it is post-love, as indeed Charlotte and Bob must feel in their situations. Without getting into spoiler territory, I thought the end of this film was unsatisfactory. Though it signified a neat conclusion to the relationship between Bob and Charlotte, I think it was a little contrived and unnecessary. There were scenes earlier which, I believe, had they been tweaked, would have constituted a more satisfying round-off to the story. It's hard to talk about without spoiling anything, so I'll just say that as an ending, what we got felt tacked on and a bit rushed, even if it ultimately served its purpose. As a film that cost $4 million and took $119 million, you must ask yourself, why isn't there a sequel? Presumably, it's because the filmmakers respected their own work too much and knew that it stood alone. After all, a sequel would undermine so much that is important to the story and these characters. Either way, the film is a delight in terms of tone, narrative and visuals, and I would highly recommend anyone to watch it.